We're so excited to be bringing this book to you called God's Crime Scene for Kids, Investigate Creation with a Real Detective by J. Warner Wallace and Susie Wallace. We dedicate this reading to a very special listener called Jax. We hope you enjoy this one. Let's get into it. Preface: the mystery. Did I just dream that? Jason bolts upright in bed and looks at the ceiling. Did he imagine that loud crashing noise he heard overhead? Or was it part of a dream? Could a noise in a dream actually wake someone from their sleep? Jason rubs his eyes and looks at the clock on his nightstand. 2:30 a.m. What could cause such a noise at this time of night? The attic above, Jason said, is hardly ever used, and he hasn't been up there in years. He grabs his flashlight from a nightstand drawer and slowly walks to the hallway. He flashes the light down the long, dark hall toward a partially open attic door. He pushes past the half-open door and walks up the steps to the attic. Although he's scared at first, he reminds himself that he's a graduated cadet. What would the other cadets back at the Police Department Junior Academy think if he was too afraid to explore his own house? Jason gathers himself and tries to be calm as he enters the dark attic. He flips the light switch at the top of the stairs. The single light bulb hanging in the middle of the attic blinks on, then makes a popping sound and turns off again. Jason toggles the switch off and on with no success. Great, he whispers under his breath. Is anyone up here? He asks, trying to sound confident and courageous. No response. He scans the attic with his flashlight. Dust particles swirl in the cramped space. There are lots of boxes, a mousetrap or two, a few dead bugs, and piles of old newspapers. Then Jason sees what might have been the source of the noise. On one side of the attic, he observes a fallen stack of books. Thinking like a detective, he notices the dust around the books appear to be recently disturbed. Jason moves in closer and peers at a slightly tattered shoebox lying among the books. Worn around the edges, it must have been stacked on top when the books fell. He uses the flashlight to examine the contents of the box. Minutes pass. Jason is so intrigued by what he discovers that he loses track of time. The next day, Jason enters the police briefing room and looks like he hasn't slept much. He squints under the bright lights and searches for his seat among the long rows of tables facing the front of the room. There's a small podium and a whiteboard in front of the tables, and the side walls contain information on local crime trends and wanted suspects. On the white stand, someone has written, Special Investigation Junior Academy. You're there along with the other cadet juniors, including your friends Hannah and Daniel. Students from the local schools heard about this opportunity to train again at the Police Junior Cadet Academy. This time, the department is offering a special investigations course. You walk over to Jason to say hello, but before you can say anything, Detective Alan Jeffries enters the room. Take your seat, cadets. Jeffries' voice booms in his typical serious voice. If you didn't know better, you'd be a bit intimidated by his bear-like figure and the look on his face. But this is your second Junior Cadet Academy course with Detective Jeffries. He seems tough and businesslike, but you know he's as glad to see you as you are to see him. Before Jeffries can say anything else, Jason's hand shoots up. Sir, he says, I've got a case. A case of what? Measles? Asks Hannah. Everyone laughs, but Jason says, no, a case for us to solve. Let's hear it, says Jeffries. Well, Jason said, I live with my Grandma Miri. I was sleeping in my room last night and a loud noise suddenly woke me up. It came from above in the attic. Hardly anyone ever goes up there, but I got my flashlight and went to see what made the noise. Yeah, said Daniel. Jason describes the scene in the attic and the fallen stack of books. Okay, so what's the mystery with that? You already figured out what caused the noise, says Hannah. I found something mysterious under the fallen books. Jason describes the shoebox for the cadets. At first I didn't think anything of it, but then I took a close look at what was inside. The cadets lean in as Jason recalls his findings. I found a small hand shovel, a magnifying glass, an unmarked graduation-type class ring, and a drawing of a boy standing next to a tall, unusual tree. That's weird, you say. Those things don't seem to have much in common. It gets even weirder, responds Jason as he removes an old piece of lined paper from his pocket. This was also in the box. Jason reads the note. Dear Jason, if you're reading these words, great. The note got to you. Life is full of difficult situations and unanswered questions. No one knows that better than you. But I know where to find the answers. Follow these clues to find a gift just for you. It's the answer to all your questions, but you'll have to think carefully about the clues, dig around, look carefully, and change your mind. Now that's a mystery, said Hannah. Is the note signed? No, replies Jason. All right then, says Jeffries, this is an excellent place to start our next academy course. I'll teach you a number of new investigative skills so you can solve this mystery. If you can apply these skills and figure out who wrote this note, you'll be eligible to graduate and earn your special investigation certificate. Everyone appears to be excited about the new case. Jeffries walks to the whiteboard and gets everyone's attention. Any initial observations about the note, class, he asks. Daniel, always thinking, says, it said nobody knows about tough luck more than Jason. What does that mean? Everyone pauses to think about this, then looks in Jason's direction. Jason hesitates, then shares something he's never mentioned before. I guess that's true, he says. He looks at the floor and adds quietly, I lost my mum and dad when I was just a baby. They died in a car accident. I don't remember them at all. Most people think my grandma Mary is my mum because she looks so young, I guess. So your grandmother raised you? Asks Hannah, placing a caring hand on his shoulder. Yes, it's just the two of us now. My grandpa Ren also died when I was about 2 years old. I've never understood why I had to lose my parents and grandfather before I even got to know them. Listening to Jason, you think back to other experiences you've had with him. When you first met him, he was one of the most skeptical people you'd ever encountered. He especially doubted the existence of God and the truth of Christianity. You wonder if his doubts were caused by his experience as a child. Did he question the existence of a good God because of what happened to his family members? So where's the box now? Asked Detective Jeffries. At home. I live just around the corner from the police department. Jason looks at Detective Jeffries. I knew from my experience as a cadet that I should probably leave the box the way I found it and tell you all about it today. I did tell Grandma about it, though. She thinks maybe Simba knocked the boxes and it fell over. Simba? Asks Hannah. Our cat. Also, Grandma recognizes the handwriting on the note. It's Grandpa Wren's writing. But what's that weird message about? Daniel asks. What are the clues your grandpa wrote about? Detective Jeffries says, that's the mystery we're going to solve together, cadets. He focuses on Jason. As we solve the mystery of the shoebox, I bet we can use our detective skills to find the other answers your grandpa was describing in that note too. Turning to the cadets, Jeffries instructs them, let's meet at Jason's house for our next session together. Chapter 1. How did it get here? Was the universe an inside job? The cadets are all present on the front porch of Jason's house, and it's time to start the next session. Detective Jeffries walks up from around the corner and joins them. He's carrying a professional-looking black work bag. So where's the box? Daniel asks Jason. Impatience is not a good detective skill, says Jeffries. Daniel blushes. Hannah grins and adds, we haven't even entered Jason's house yet. Jason opens the front door and is greeted immediately by Grandma Mary. She's a tiny woman with grey shoulder-length hair. She has a contagious smile. Welcome, everyone, she booms. She's surprisingly loud for someone her size. Jason told me about your investigation. I'm excited to hear about what you may discover. Let me show you all to the crime scene. She giggles a bit and escorts them to the attic stairwell. You must be Detective Jeffries, says Grandma Mary. Jeffries politely extends his hand. Thanks so much for allowing us to come here today. Before Grandma Mary can respond, Simba appears and makes himself known with a loud meow. He's a sleek-looking orange tabby. Detective Jeffries bends down and picks up the tabby. Nice kitty, he says as he rubs behind the cat's ears. Simba immediately snuggles in under Jeffries' neck and starts to purr. Jeffries cradles Simba gently for a moment. You smile as you recognize the often hidden, gentler side of the burly detective. Jeffries catches your smile from the corner of his eye and realizes all the cadets are staring at him as he's cuddling the cat. He quickly puts the cat down, regains his composure, and says sternly, None of you saw that? But everybody laughs. Light is now streaming through the small dorm window on one side of the attic. The space is rustic. Cobwebs can be seen in the open rafters. Not everyone can fit, so some of the cadets watch from the top of the stairs. The cadets take out their notepads to jot down their observations. Detective Jeffries put on a pair of evidence gloves and pulls out a digital camera from his black detective bag. Let's start by photographing the attic the way you found it. Jason, is the attic about the same as it was when you came up last night? I think so, says Jason, but it was dark and I hardly ever come up here. Jeffrey starts taking photographs of the fallen books on the shoebox. He also photographs the dusty area around the box, the cobwebs, and even the mouse traps lying on the floor of the attic. After several minutes, he turns to the cadets. This box, says Jeffries as he crouches down in the tightest space, is a good example of something I want to teach you today. One of the first questions an investigator asks once he or she discovers what might be evidence is, how did it get here? And Jason's mysterious shoebox is a great example. He examines the box closely. All right, cadets, what are we trying to solve in this investigation? The cadets look at one another for a minute. Then you break the silence. We're trying to solve a mystery about who put these items in the box, how they're supposed to be used, and what the note for Jason means, right? Exactly, says Jeffries. In order to answer those questions, we have to ask an important first question about causation. What's that? Asks one of the cadets. Well, responds Jeffries, we need to figure out what caused the shoebox to be in the attic in the first place, and then what caused the items to be in the box. Jeffries explains, imagine we're investigating a burglary at a local business and we find a glove at the scene of the crime. How do I know if it is an important piece of evidence? Maybe the thief dropped it, but if it just belongs to someone who works there, if it was there before the burglar even entered the scene, it's not actually evidence of the crime at all, right? That makes sense, you say. Now, let's turn our attention to this shoebox, says Jeffries as he carefully lifts it from the floor. Where did the box come from? There are really only two choices. The box came from somewhere outside the attic, or it was always in the attic. Always in the attic, asked Jason. That's crazy. I mean, it couldn't have always been here. Shoeboxes come from somewhere. But what if it sort of grew in here, says Jeffries with a little smile. You recognize that expression on Jeffries' face. You've seen it before when he's trying to get a response from the cadets. Jeffries continues, after all, mold grows in cellars, right? It just kind of happens naturally. Maybe boxes can grow in attics. I don't think so, says Hannah, with a bit of humour in her voice. Shoeboxes don't grow in attics naturally. If they did, this attic would be full of them, but this is the only one. Agreed, says Jeffries. The box hasn't been in here forever, and it doesn't appear here on its own. The same is true for everything in the box, too. Someone outside the attic put the shoebox in the room, and someone outside the box has put these items inside it. Several of the cadets nod their heads in agreement. Jeffries continues, now that we've answered that question, let's focus on what's inside the shoebox. Are there any clues inside the box that might tell us what or who the outside cause might be? I think it is a who, says Hannah, because there's a letter, and the letter mentions the things in the box. At least I think so. It reads, look carefully, which could refer to the magnifying glass, and also dig around, which may be describing the shovel. Very good, exclaims Jeffries. Not only that, but Jason's grandmother says the note looks like it was written by Grandpa Wren. So we have good reasons to believe Grandpa Wren put those items in the box, says Daniel. Exactly, says Detective Jeffries. We can't explain the things inside the shoebox with a cause that's also inside the shoebox. An outside cause is the best explanation, and so far, Grandpa Wren seems to be the most reasonable outside cause. Let's head back to the briefing room, says Jeffries as he gently collects the box and places it in a paper evidence bag. I bet we can apply this same approach to an important question about the universe that we're investigating. The universe? What did Detective Jeffries mean? You find yourself thinking about this as everyone returns to the police department and the cadets file back into the briefing room. Once everyone is seated, Jeffries walks up to the whiteboard and draws a box. We live in a vast universe filled with planets, stars, and galaxies. Everything in our universe is made up of space, time, and matter. The cadets look a bit puzzled. What does this have to do with Jason's shoebox? Detective Jeffries sees the quizzical look on your faces and points to the box he drew on the whiteboard. We found some things in the shoebox and then we tried to figure out if a cause inside or outside the box was the best explanation, explains Jeffries as he starts to draw the items from the shoebox. What if we investigated the universe in a similar way? Jeffries now draws a large diagram of the universe. Could the evidence we find in the cosmos have been caused by something inside the box involving nothing more than space, time, and matter? Or is the best explanation for this evidence something other than space, time, or matter? In other words, something outside the universe? The items in the box were either there forever, appeared there all by themselves, or were placed there by someone outside the box. In a similar way, everything we find in the universe has either been here forever, appeared here all by itself, or was placed here by something outside the universe. Hannah gets an expression on her face like an idea just came to her mind. Something outside the universe that isn't made of space, time, or matter? Are you talking about God? Jeffries smirks. Let's look at the evidence first before we make a decision. He points back to his drawing. The first piece of evidence in Jason's mystery was simply the shoebox itself. How did it get in the attic in the first place? My grandpa put it there based on the evidence, replies Jason. Good, says Jeffries. Does anyone know how the universe got here? Was it always here? I don't think so, says Hannah. My older sister Cameron is in high school and her teacher said the universe simply popped into existence. She called it the Big Bang. Cameron learned about it in her science class. Like the big bump, jokes Daniel. We learned that in Jason's attic. All the cadets laugh. Ha ha, says Jeffries. Except with the bump, something caused it, whether the cat did it or something else, right? As for the universe, scientists seem to think there was a Big Bang, yes. And here's something even more interesting. Jeffrey leans closer to the cadets and lowers his voice. The cadets are listening eagerly. These same scientists think that everything in the universe, all space, time, and matter came into existence from nothing. Everything in the universe started from just empty space? Asks Jason. No, responds Jeffries. Space isn't nothing. Space is something. Scientists believe that before the universe existed, there wasn't even space. No space, no time, and no matter. Everyone sits for a moment to think about what Detective Jeffries just said. Jason breaks the silence. Well, that's kind of hard to imagine. I mean, the idea of nothing. Hannah has that expression on her face again, like she's thinking hard. Wait a minute. So if nothing existed before the universe, I mean truly nothing, what caused the universe to begin? What created it? Jeffries smiles. That's a really good question. The shoebox couldn't cause itself to exist, and the universe can't cause itself to exist either. Everything that has a beginning must be caused by something else. The cause of the shoebox couldn't be found inside the shoebox, and the cause of the universe can't be found inside the universe either. What exists outside the universe that could cause it to pop into existence? Asked Daniel. Well, the more evidence we study, the better answer we'll have, says Jeffries. We know a few things about the shoebox, for example. It wasn't in the attic forever, and the items in the box didn't appear in the box on their own. The best explanation for the items inside the box is someone outside the box. And finally, based on the evidence in the box, Grandpa Wren is the most reasonable explanation. Does all this make sense so far, Jason? Yes, sir, replies Jason. Now let's turn our attention to our investigation of the universe, says Jeffries as he adds something to his diagram. So far, we've only talked about one fact. We live in a universe that has a beginning. And even though we don't have a lot of evidence yet, we can start to think about a suspect profile, a picture of how the cause of the universe might be described given the facts that we have. Here's what we know about our suspect so far. First, it caused the universe to come into existence. Second, it isn't made up of space, time, or matter. Third, it's powerful enough to create everything we see in the universe from nothing. Detective Jeffries turns back to the cadets. Looks like we're on our way to solving two mysteries, he declares. A shoebox and a universe, you say. I still want to know why Grandpa Wren put this stuff in the shoebox and what he meant in his message to me, says Jason. Oh, we're going to get all those answers, Jason. Don't you worry. But remember, impatience is not a good detective skill. The cadets laugh as the session ends and they leave the briefing room. So that's the end of chapter 1. And I just want to say a little note there. So someone mentioned in this chapter about the Big Bang and whether that caused the universe. We're going to keep reading and you keep listening because we're going to find out whether that's true or not according to what the Bible says. Here we go. Chapter 2. All tuned up. Who is responsible? Follow me to the forensics lab, commands Detective Jeffries before everyone can get seated at the next Junior Academy session. The cadets appear excited about their first chance to visit the place where science and detective investigations collide. They descend a set of stairs to the bottom floor of the police department. The first room of the lab is filled with technicians sitting at their desks, studying images and files on wide computer screens. This room is separated from the next by a long wall of windows. Through the glass, you can see more technicians working in the adjacent room, studying evidence laid out on tables. Circle around, says Jeffries as he guides the cadets into an examination room. This room is smaller. On one end of the room is a whiteboard and a few chairs. There's a table in the centre covered with wide white paper. The evidence bag containing the shoebox is sitting in the centre of the papered surface. Jeffries puts on a light blue apron, plastic gloves for his hands, and a cap for his hair. Let's take a closer look at this shoebox. What do you see? Each cadet leans in to peer at the box. Well, it looks worn, says one of the cadets. Or should I say, deteriorated? What else, encourages Jeffries. The tiny holes, says Daniel, on the edge. See, they're unusual. They look like they were made by something that tried to eat at the edges of the box. Good observation. Do you see anything else? Asks Jeffries. Hannah says, the items inside the box don't appear to be worn or damaged. Look at the paper note and drawing, and I'd say it's lucky that the holes at the edges of the box weren't so big that they allowed the things inside, the ring for example, to slip out. Or allowed whatever caused those holes to get in, says Jason. I think Hannah's observation about the size of the holes is important, notes Jeffries. Was it just luck that these holes weren't bigger? What do you think caused them in the first place? I know the answer to that question, says Jason as he steps toward the table. We've had problems with mice in the past. That's why we originally got Simba, but even he couldn't keep up with them. I bet those holes were caused by mice eating away at the objects in the attic. I did see mouse traps up there, you recall. Just then, a technician knocks on the door of the examination room. Here are the photos you ordered, Detective. She hands several printed images to Jeffries. Thanks, Carol, just in time. Jeffries turns to the whiteboard. Using small round magnets, he begins to post the photos on the surface of the board. They display the attic as Jeffries photographed it during the last session. Yes, we can see these mouse traps on the floor of the attic, says Jeffries, pointing to one of the photos. Jason suggests, so it wasn't really luck that prevented the holes in the box from getting bigger. They stayed small because my grandma Mary got Simba and even put those traps in the attic. Great point, replies Jeffries. In many ways, your grandma controlled the environment of the house and the attic to make sure its contents survived without much damage. You might say she fine-tuned your home, Jason. What do you mean by fine-tuned, you ask? Well, I can think of several alternative scenarios in which the shoebox might have been completely destroyed by rodents. Detective Jeffries starts to draw on the whiteboard. Let's say, for example, that Jason's grandparents decided to buy a house in the country instead of one here in the city. In the countryside, where things are a bit more wild, there would have been an even greater possibility of mouse and rodent damage. So even at the foundational level of where Jason's home is located, it's not an accident that there are fewer critters to destroy things. Add to this the fact that Grandma Mary got a cat to help control the mice. So from the regional perspective of Jason's house, it's also not an accident that there is less of a rodent problem. Simba is a pretty good hunter, says Jason. Finally, to make sure there weren't any rodents in the attic, Grandma Mary set mouse traps, says Jeffries as he points to the drawing. She intervened at what I call the locational level, and that's why the things in the shoebox survived, says Daniel. That's right. It wasn't an accident. When we see this kind of intervention, this kind of fine-tuning at all three of these levels, it's reasonable to conclude that someone intentionally acted to make sure the items in the attic survived. Jeffries puts down his marker. Now that you've learned about fine-tuning and the three levels of evidence collection, let's go back to the briefing room and apply this to the universe. Remember the diagram I just drew of Jason's house? Jeffries asks as the cadets retake their seats in the briefing room. Let's make a similar diagram of the entire universe. He starts drawing again on the whiteboard. Just as we found evidence of fine-tuning at Jason's house in the foundational, regional, and locational levels, we find similar levels of fine-tuning in the universe. The cadets are trying to copy Jeffries' diagram on their notepads. The foundational conditions of the universe are incredibly fine-tuned. Detective Jeffries turns to the cadets and holds up his marker, then drops it to the floor. You recognize this example from your first junior academy experience with Jeffries, but for many of the other cadets in the room, this is their first time seeing it. Did you notice how fast the marker fell? Jeffries asks. Why didn't it fall faster or slower? Why did it fall to the ground at all? The force of gravity caused it to fall, says one of the cadets. Exactly. But did you ever stop to think that the force of gravity must be just so, not too strong and not too weak for our universe to exist? You mean like the porridge in the story of Goldilocks and the Three Bears, you say? Gravity is just right? A few of the cadets giggle. That's precisely what I mean. And it's not just gravity. All the other forces in our universe and even the forces in an atom have to be perfectly fine-tuned or our universe wouldn't exist and there certainly wouldn't be any life in the cosmos. But what if these forces were just a bit stronger or just a bit weaker? We'd adjust to that, wouldn't we? Asks Jason. Jeffries shakes his head. Actually, no. Scientists have discovered that the tiniest difference in any of the dozens of foundational forces of the universe would prevent life altogether. And there's more, adds Jeffries, as he turns back to the whiteboard. At the regional level of the galaxies and star systems, there's even more evidence of fine-tuning. Star systems? You mean like our solar system, you ask? Yes. Our sun and the other planets in our solar system are perfectly fine-tuned so life can exist here on Earth. The position, shape, age, and mass of our sun are just right, like Goldilocks porridge. If our sun were any different, life couldn't exist on our planet. I never thought of our sun like porridge, says Daniel. Even our galaxy's like Goldilocks porridge, adds Jeffries. You mean the Milky Way? Asks Hannah. Yes, even the Milky Way is fine-tuned for the existence of life, says Jeffries, as he draws the shape of our galaxy on the whiteboard. Only about 5% of the galaxies in the universe have spiral arms like ours. If our universe was shaped differently or larger than it is, the radiation from its core would make life impossible. So our galaxy needs some milk to cool it down, quips Daniel, and everyone laughs. Not quite, says Detective Jeffries, but you get the idea. One more thing. Jeffries begins drawing again on the whiteboard. At the locational level of our home planet, Earth, conditions are also fine-tuned for life. Our planet has the right kind of sun, atmosphere, ground surface, and even the right kind of moon to make life possible. Just like Jason's house and the 3 levels of fine-tuning we observed, there are 3 levels of fine-tuning in the universe. Jeffries turns from the whiteboard to the cadets with a serious look on his face. Now think about what we investigated in our first session, he prompts. Daniel raises his hand and says, I remember we discovered the universe couldn't have been created from an inside cause. It came from nothing, so it must have been caused by something outside of space, time, and matter. Correct. Now let's look at the 3 levels of fine-tuning we've discovered today. Could something inside the universe have caused everything to be just so? I don't know, Jason says. Maybe there isn't any other way the universe could be. Isn't it possible that the universe just had to be this way? Great question, replies Jeffries. The answer is no, at least not according to our best scientists. The forces we described could have been very different, and so could the shape of the galaxies, star systems, and even our planet. We learned something interesting about the shoebox today, says Jeffries. The items in the shoebox survived because Jason's grandparents fine-tuned the environment. They bought a house in the city, got Simba as a pet, and set the mousetraps. Jeffries points to the diagram of the universe. Our universe seems to be similar. If the forces in the universe weren't just so, if our galaxies and star systems weren't just right, and if Earth weren't fine-tuned as it is, life in the universe would not have emerged and survived. Detective Jeffries adds this piece of evidence to the diagram. The cadets think about this for a moment. Hannah says in a hushed tone, if the fine-tuning we saw at Jason's house is evidence that Grandma Miri was involved as a fine-tuner, does that mean the fine-tuning we see in the universe is evidence of some kind of powerful fine-tuner? It seems like somebody's working the controls or none of us would be here. Everyone is quiet for a minute. Then Jeffries says, I do think we can add something to our suspect file from the last session. He reminds the cadets of the profile he began last time. Whatever caused the universe also fine-tuned it with a purpose in mind. And that purpose was the existence of life. A purpose, you ask? Yes, our universe appears to have been fine-tuned so life like ours could exist. Jeffries puts down the marker. The cadets are quietly thinking about everything they've learnt. Next time, we'll take a closer look at the contents of the shoebox so we can figure out what Grandpa Wren's purpose was when he wrote the letter, says Jeffries. Finally, blurts out Daniel impatiently. Everyone laughs as this week's session comes to a close. Chapter 3, Directions for Life. Does the text require an author? Detective Jeffries is standing at the front of the briefing room, opening the evidence bag that contains the shoebox. He's covered one of the tables with white paper and he's wearing his gloves and blue apron. Let's all gather around the evidence, he says, as he removes the items from the box. Jeffries picks up the drawing of a boy standing next to a tree and asks, "Did any of you notice that any of the items in the box, of all of them, to contain information?" Jason raises his hand. "The note from my grandpa was written to me," he says. "Yes, and the drawing also contains information," adds Jeffries. "The other items can be investigated for their meaning, but these two objects, the note and the drawing, are an obvious attempt by someone to tell us something." "I never thought of a drawing that way before," says one of the cadets. "Artists are communicators, just like authors," says Detective Jeffries, as he uses magnets to post the drawing on the whiteboard so everyone can see it. "Let's try to figure out what the artist is trying to tell us in the picture." Everyone looks at the drawing. A boy with black hair is standing under an unusual tree with delicate red leaves. Jason seems to be concentrating. "I bet that's the tree in my backyard." The other cadets lean in closer. "There's a tree planted in our yard, but it's the only one with red leaves." Someone says, "So is the boy in the drawing you, Jason?" The cadets look intently from the drawing to Jason and back again. Jason starts to feel a bit awkward, but eventually admits, "I guess it could be me." "Grab your notepads," commands Detective Jeffries. "I think it's time for another field trip." The cadets take a short walk around the corner to Jason's house, talking loudly amongst themselves and speculating about the meaning of the drawing. They gather at the gate that opens into Grandma Mary's backyard and garden. "Back again so soon?" asks Grandma Mary as she opens the gate. She's smiling again from ear to ear. "I could hear you coming from around the corner." Jason explains everything to his grandmother as she welcomes the cadets into the backyard. They circle around the tree with the delicate red leaves. It is very large and surrounded by a beautiful flower bed. "It definitely looks like the tree in the drawing," you say as Detective Jeffries joins the group. "Yes, it does," he agrees. "Let's use this opportunity to develop another detective skill." The cadets pull out their notebooks and get ready to write. "Every investigation involves answering key questions," begins Jeffries, "and some questions are more important than others. Detectives focus on the 5 W's and the 1 H. The cadets have expressions on their faces like they aren't quite sure what he means. "In every investigation," he continues, "we must remember to ask the what, why, when, where, how, and who questions. My English teacher makes us answer those questions in our essays," one of the cadets remarks. "Your teacher would be a very good detective," says Jeffries. As the cadets are getting comfortable sitting on the grass around the tree, Simba appears from the side of the house and joins them. The cat immediately jumps into Hannah's lap and pushes his face under her chin. "Sorry about Simba," Grandma Mary says. "He loves people and loves being petted, and he's not bashful about asking." Hannah giggles and begins to scratch Simba's head. "Grandma Mary, can we ask you a few questions about this tree?" inquires Detective Jeffries. She nods in agreement. Before Jeffries can begin, the cadets respond to a noise in the next yard. They look toward the edge of the garden and see a curious face peering over the top of the neighbor's fence. "Hi, Jasmine," says Jason. "Everyone meet Jasmine, our neighbor. Come on over and we'll explain what's going on." To everyone's surprise, Jasmine jumps over the fence to join them. Jason describes the mystery to her, and when he's finished, Jeffries begins with his first question. "I want to start with a what question," he says. "What kind of tree is this?" "It's called a bloodgood tree," says Grandma Mary, as she rubs the trunk of a large tree and looks up at its branches. "That sounds like the kind of tree a detective would investigate," says Daniel, trying to get a laugh from the other cadets. "Perhaps it does," responds Grandma Mary, "but it really has more to do with the color of the leaves." Everyone looks up at the red leafy canopy overhead. Is that a nest? Asks one of the cadets, pointing to a cluster of twigs on one of the lower branches. Before anyone can respond, Jasmine jumps up and starts climbing the tree. I'll check, and within seconds she reports, it looks abandoned. Can I keep it? Grandma Mary smiles and nods. Jasmine climbs down and nearly trips on something sticking up in the flower bed at the base of the tree. She stumbles, blushes for an instant, then sits back down with the other cadets as she holds the empty nest. Now I've got a where question for you, says Jeffries, returning to his interview. I've never seen another tree like this, and I've lived in this area my entire life. Where did it come from? From Japan, Grandma Mary answers. Many of the cadets are surprised by her answer. Japan? Asks Jeffries. Wow, I guess I better ask a how question. How did this tree get here from Japan? My husband Ren's family had a nursery in Japan. They raised many kinds of plants and trees, including Japanese maple trees. This bloodgood tree is one of many maple trees they used to grow there. Ren's father sent us seeds to grow it here in America. Jeffries pauses. I've asked what, where, and how questions. Can I ask a why question now? Why did you want this kind of a tree in your yard? Grandma Mary smiles and looks affectionately at Jason. Ren wanted to plant this special tree to commemorate the birth of Jason. He was our very first grandchild. Ren wanted Jason to grow up with a tree that meant a lot to Ren's family. Cadets, says Detective Jeffries. We asked 4 of our 6 detective questions, and along the way we've gotten answers we didn't expect related to when and why the tree was planted. For example, when was this tree planted in the yard? When Jason was born to celebrate his birth, you answer. That's correct. And who planted the tree? Grandpa Wren, says Jasmine. She's still holding the nest and doing her best to fend off Simba, who's taken an interest in her find. And, you should have been here to see how careful my Wren was when he planted this tree, said Grandma Mary, shooing Simba from Jasmine's lap. What do you mean, Grandma Mary? Asked Jeffries. Wren got the seeds in the mail from his father. They came with very specific instructions about how to plant and nurture them until we had a maple sapling. They had to be fertilized just so, and the young tree had to be moved from the sapling pot to the ground in a very specific way. Wren followed his father's instructions to the letter to make sure the tree would survive. Grandma Mary gazes up at the broad branches and delicate leaves. And look at it now. Jeffries thanks Grandma Mary and directs the cadets to return to the police station. You may not realize it, but you just learned something important that we can apply to our investigation of the universe. We've investigated 2 important attributes of the universe, reminds Jeffries as all the cadets take their seats back in the briefing room. Who can recall what we've examined so far? The universe has a beginning, and the universe is finely tuned for life, you offer. Exactly, says Jeffries. Now I want to offer a 3rd piece of evidence. Life in our universe appeared from non-life. Jeffries modifies one of his earlier drawings to include this fact. Life from non-life, asks Jason. Yes, all the living creatures in our universe, everything on our planet from bacteria to simple cellular organisms to plants like Jason's maple tree to animals like Simba and even humans like all of us in this room, these living things came from non-living matter. Think about that for a minute. Jason asks, do scientists know how this happened? No, said Jeffries. They've tried many explanations, but none really seem to answer that question. Detective Jeffries writes the 6 detective questions on the whiteboard. Every time they ask one of these important detective questions, they fail to get a satisfying answer. In fact, some of these questions just lead to additional, more difficult questions. Jeffries lifts his marker to the whiteboard. When it comes to the what question, scientists are only now beginning to understand that living organisms are very complex. Life is not simple, and it didn't begin easily in the universe. Jeffries draws a line through the what question on the whiteboard. My sister's science teacher said life began in the ocean, remarks Daniel. Well, that brings us to the where question, adds Jeffries as he turns again to the whiteboard. Scientists have investigated several places as they try to figure out where all the right ingredients could come together to bring things to life. No matter where they look, they cannot find a place where the right ingredients for life could be assembled in just the right way. So he draws a line through the where question. It doesn't sound like we have a lot of answers, says Hannah quietly. You're right, Hannah. When it comes to the what, where, when, and why questions, scientists don't have good answers, and they don't often agree on the few answers that they do have. Are there any questions that scientists can answer? Asks Jason. Jeffries smiles and begins to draw something on the whiteboard. Yes, in fact, we've learned something about life that is really interesting. We've discovered something called DNA. In your body, DNA molecules carry the full map of everything about you, from your eye color to the way your body heals itself when it gets sick. Your DNA contains all the information needed for you to be who you are. There's enough information in your DNA to fill a 1,000,000-page book. Whoa, says Daniel, looking at his stomach. All that's in here somewhere? Jeffries laughs. It's all very small, at the molecular level. Who wrote that information? Asks Hannah. Why did you ask that, Hannah? Replies Jeffries. Well, you said DNA contains information, so I was wondering who wrote the information. Hannah looks like she really wants an answer. Detective Jeffries circles the who question on the whiteboard. It's interesting that you thought the author of the DNA information was a who. Jeffries turns to the cadets. Do you remember the instructions that Grandpa Wren had to follow to make sure the tree would grow and survive? The cadets nod as they remember the story from Grandma Miri. When Grandpa Wren got that note from his father, he knew an intelligent being, a who, his dad, had written it. He knew information didn't get on that note by accident. Only intelligent persons can write information like the kind Wren saw in those instructions. Jeffries points to the DNA diagram on the whiteboard. The information in DNA is far more complicated than the information on Grandpa Wren's note from his dad. If we know that note came from an intelligent who, why wouldn't we believe the information in DNA came from an intelligent who? He lifts his marker and adds a third piece of evidence to the diagram of the universe. What kind of who could write the information in DNA? Asks Jason. Detective Jeffries, are you talking about God again? Asks Hannah. A creator seems like the one possibility that makes sense. First, let's review what we've learnt about the shoebox, says Jeffries. The drawing appears to show the tree in Jason's backyard, and the boy in the drawing might be Jason. Also, the person who drew the picture wants viewers to focus their attention on the tree for some reason. I still have lots of questions about the letter in the shoebox, though, starts Daniel. I do too. But, answers Jeffries, I know, says Daniel. Good detectives are patient, and everybody laughs. Our suspect profile is growing, says Jeffries, after the cadets settle down. Whatever caused the universe to come into existence from nothing and fine-tuned it for life was also intelligent and able to communicate, as we saw in our DNA. Our suspect is starting to sound a lot like God, says Hannah. Jeffries smiles. We're not done yet, and remember, good detectives are patient, says Daniel as he looks around the room and waits for everyone to respond. You and Jason start laughing as Jeffries dismisses the group for another week. Chapter 4, The Obvious Artist. Is there evidence of an artist? This week's Academy session begins in the forensics lab. Several pairs of magnifying glasses are lying on the paper table along with a variety of short and long tweezers. There's also a box of latex examination gloves. Detective Jeffries is the last to enter the room. I'm glad you're all here, he says, as he puts the evidence bag on the table and starts taking out everything from the shoebox. I want everyone to glove up and grab a magnifying glass. The cadets respond by quickly putting on their latex gloves. Okay, says Jeffries, it's time for each of you to exercise your detective thinking skills. Start by passing around the items we discovered in the box. Handle them carefully. If you need to, you can use the tweezers and magnifying glasses to examine them. The cadets begin to pass the objects to one another. Some use the tweezers to examine Wren's letter and the drawing. Others simply hold the shovel and other objects with their gloved hands. You and Jason carefully study the outside of the ring with your magnifying glasses. On one side of the ring are the letters GGS engraved into it. I have an important question for you, says Jeffries. All the cadets stop what they're doing and look up. Look carefully at all the objects and even the shoebox we found them in. What do these items have in common? I found them in the attic, asks Jason tentatively. Well, that's true, but I have something else in mind, responds Jeffries as he reaches into his pocket. Maybe this will help. He pulls out a small rock and puts it on the table. Compare the items you found in the attic to the rock, says Jeffries. How are they different? The students talk with one another. Then Daniel jokes. Well, we didn't find the rock in the attic. Several cadets laugh as Daniel smiles proudly. Well, that's not exactly what I had in mind either, replies Jeffries. Anyone else? Jason cautiously raises his hand. I think I might know. The rock wasn't created by a human, but all the items in the box were. Exactly, says Jeffries. The shoebox and the items inside were crafted by intelligent beings. They're designed, but the rock is just the result of accidental natural events. That seems obvious now that you mention it, says Hannah. But why is it obvious? Asks Detective Jeffries. You can just tell, says one of the cadets. At that moment, the door to the examination room opens and one of the lab technicians escorts Jasmine into the room. She's carefully carrying the bird's nest she retrieved from Jason's tree. Jasmine, what are you doing here? Asks Jason. I invited her, explains Jeffries. Hi, everyone, says Jasmine. She appears to be a bit in awe as she looks around the high-tech room and sees that everyone is wearing examination gloves. I asked Jasmine to bring the nest for a reason, continues Jeffries. Be very careful now and examine the nest as you did the other objects. The cadets slowly pass the nest to one another, each using his or her magnifying glass and tweezers to examine its construction. Okay, tell me about the nest, Jeffries says as he begins to draw a diagram on the examination room whiteboard. Is the nest more like the items in the shoebox or more like the rock? Like the items in the box, you say. It looks like it was designed. It wasn't just the result of accidental natural events, asks Detective Jeffries. No, says Daniel. Birds obviously built it. Fine, but I want you to think like detectives, says Jeffries. What evidence do you have that this nest was intelligently designed by birds? Let's make a list. Hannah raises her hand. Well, how about this? It doesn't seem likely that these twigs could come together in this way by accident. Very good, says Jeffries as he writes this on the board. What else? It looks like other things we know were designed, observes Daniel, like a bowl made by a potter. That's a great observation, commends Detective Jeffries. If we know that bowls are designed objects, why wouldn't we think the nest is designed? Jeffries adds this to his growing list on the whiteboard. Daniel is holding the nest very close to his face, looking at it with a magnifying glass. Did you all notice how the twigs aren't just lying together randomly? They're actually woven together a little bit so they stay together as a nest. Can I add something? Asks Jasmine. Of course, replies Jeffries as he hands the nest to her. I've had some time to study the nest at home and I was amazed that the birds seemed to have a goal. They put larger, stiffer twigs on the outside of the nest to build it nice and strong, but used finer, softer pine needles on the inside to make it soft enough to hold eggs. It's as if the bird's purpose from the very beginning was to build a house with a soft bed. The cadets stand in silence. They are impressed with Jasmine's observation. Wow, says Hannah. Jasmine's a pretty good detective and she hasn't even been part of the academy. Jeffries laughs and adds his observation to the list of evidence. Couldn't gravity have caused some of these twigs to fall into place, though? Asks Jason. Maybe, replies Jeffries, but do you think this nest could come together as we see it today just because of gravity or some law of nature? Jason thinks about it. No, I don't think so. Let's add that fact to our list, says Jeffries as he turns again to the whiteboard. Okay, take a look at what we have so far, everyone. I've drawn the nest and 5 good pieces of evidence that indicate it was created by intelligent birds. It didn't just fall into place by accident or through some natural law. Jeffries turns his attention to Jasmine. You said you were amazed by what you saw in this little nest. He then looks towards the cadets. I think you'll all be more amazed at what you're about to see in something much smaller. Let's go up to the briefing room. Detective Jeffries immediately starts drawing on the whiteboard upstairs. Everyone looks intently at the elaborate and detailed object he is sketching. By the time he is done, the cadets are impressed. Wow, you're a great artist, says one of the cadets. Thanks, says Jeffries. He points to the object he's drawn. This is a motor that spins a long rope-like arm. The motor is driven by an electrical charge that causes this rotor to turn. So tell me, is this a product of intelligent design or just the result of accidental natural events? Almost in unison, the cadets shout, Design! Tell it to me like detectives, says Jeffries. Give me some evidence. Think about the evidence you discovered with the bird's nest. Your motor is too complicated to have come together by accident, says one of the cadets. Good, congratulates Jeffries. What else? It looks just like the rotary engine on my dad's fishing boat, says Daniel, and I know that was designed by a motor company. Fine, let's add that, says Jeffries as he continues to write on the whiteboard. Everything also seems interconnected and intricate, much more than the bird's nest, you say. I agree, says Jeffries, and the motor seems designed to spin that rope-like arm. It has a purpose, adds Jasmine. Just like your observation of the bird's nest, remembers Jeffries. And I guess there's no way all those motor pieces could have come together because of gravity or some other natural law, says Jason. You're right about that too, Jason, says Jeffries, as he finishes his diagram. I want to tell you something about this motor, cadets. Detective Jeffries pauses for dramatic effect. This motor is much smaller than the nest. I just drew it large so that you can see it. In fact, this motor is so small it can only be seen through a microscope. The cadets look at one and then back at the diagram. It's a bacterial flagellum, says Jeffries, and it's microscopic in size. This little motor isn't used to propel a boat. It's used by bacteria so they can move around. Wow, says Jasmine. That is more amazing than my nest. There are thousands of other micro machines that are just as remarkable inside your body, replies Detective Jeffries, and scientists are discovering more and more every day. Jeffries returns to his prior diagram of the universe. These machines are actually a fourth piece of evidence in the universe, the appearance of design in biology. Jeffries adds the fourth fact to the diagram. And just like the nest, adds Jeffries, you cadets gave me the same good evidence to indicate that micro-machines in our bodies were designed by an intelligent being. Wait a minute, says Jason. How could these machines in our bodies be designed? Who could be the designer? I keep saying it. We're talking about God again, right? Hannah says impatiently. Who else could be the intelligent designer who could create these machines? Hold on. Remember, starts Jeffries. It's important to be patient, finishes Daniel. At least it's not me being impatient this time. As the cadets laugh, Jeffries calls their attention to another important aspect of the growing suspect file. We now know something more about whatever it was that caused the universe to come into existence. Not only is it intelligent and able to communicate, it's also a creative designer. That's why we see the obvious signs of design in the world around us. That's a lot to think about, you say, as you copy Detective Jeffries' diagrams into your notepad. I wonder if this is what my grandpa meant when he said I would have to think carefully about the clues, says Jason. Perhaps, says Detective Jeffries. We've only just begun to explore the mysteries of the shoebox and the universe. Chapter 5, Thinking About Thinking, Are We More Than Matter? It's almost time for the next Academy session to begin, and Detective Jeffries is standing at the front of the briefing room, checking his watch and walking back and forth near the whiteboard. Now, look who's impatient, whispers Daniel to Jason. I heard that, says Jeffries in a booming voice. I know some of you have been eager to figure out what Grandpa Wren meant when he wrote in his note to think carefully about the clues. Many of the cadets nod in agreement. Today we are going on a field trip that will help you understand what it means to think in the first place. Gather your things and join me as we walk down the street to the coroner's office. We have an important appointment there in a few minutes. The coroner's office? Why is Detective Jeffries taking us there, you wonder, as you walk briskly with the other cadets. The office looks professional on the outside, a little like a hospital. In the lobby, Detective Jeffries talks to the receptionist. Moments later, a woman wearing a white lab coat enters and greets Jeffries and the cadets. This is Dr. Jennifer Kelly, cadets, says Jeffries. Dr. Kelly smiles warmly and waves hello. She'll be giving us a brief tour of the coroner's office. Some of the cadets whisper with one another. Many still wonder how any of this is related to Grandpa Wren's note or the shoebox. Let's begin, says Dr. Kelly, as she opens the door to a long hallway. I'm a deputy coroner here, and I sometimes get to help people like Detective Jeffries investigate suspicious deaths. Some of the cadets already have questions. Daniel raises his hand. You said you're a deputy. Are you in law enforcement? No, responds Dr. Kelly, as she guides everyone down the hallway. I'm a licensed doctor, just like the kind of doctor you visit when you are sick. Only I have a specialty, dead people. Hannah stops in her tracks. Did you say dead people? Yes, continues the doctor, when someone dies suspiciously and the authorities aren't sure if it's a murder, accident, or a natural death, we examine the body to help them figure it out. The doctor stops everyone at the entrance to a large room. Two shiny metal doors push open easily from the center. We do our examinations in this room, she says, as she invites everyone inside. Some of the cadets are hesitant to enter. Are dead people in there? Asks someone from the back of the group. No, don't worry. I'm taking you into an empty examination room. The cadets enter the room and are immediately mesmerized by all the medical equipment. There are several long metal tables, each has a large light and magnifying glass suspended by a mechanical arm. Next to the tables are large sinks and a variety of sterilized glass containers. You can see several scalpels and cutting instruments on the racks next to the tables. Is that what I think it is? Asks Daniel, with an odd tone in his voice. He's pointing to one of the shelves next to the first sink. There's a large glass jar. Inside the container, floating in clear liquid, is a brain. It's a human brain, if that's what you mean, says Dr. Kelly. When someone dies, we examine every part of their body, even their brain. She walks over and casually picks up the jar from the shelf. This brain was donated by a family to help us study other deaths in the future. A few of the cadets are surprised at how calmly the doctor handles something so gruesome. Cadets, this is why I brought you here, says Jeffries. Today, Dr. Kelly is going to teach us something important related to Grandpa Wren's note. Dr. Kelly guides the group to a meeting room down the hall. After everyone is seated, she places the jar on a table next to a large whiteboard. Grandpa Wren's note, begins Detective Jeffries, instructs Jason to think about the clues carefully. What do detectives use when they think about evidence? Jason points to the jar on the table. Our brains? Dr. Kelly speaks up. Do we use our brains or do we use our minds? What's the difference? Asks Jason. I'm glad you asked, Jason, replies Jeffries. Detective work, as you know from what I taught you in our first academy, requires us to learn how to think. I brought you here today to learn the difference between our brains and minds so you can understand what we are using when we think. Jeffries turns to Dr. Kelly. Doctor, is there a difference between the brain and the mind? Yes, there are several important differences, she says, as she picks up a black marker. She draws two images and writes two headings with the words brain and mind. Sometimes people mistakenly believe your brain is the same thing as your mind, but it's not. For example, you can hold a brain in your hands. You can even put it in a jar. Dr. Kelly holds up the glass container, but you can't hold your mind. It's not physical or material like your brain. That's an important difference. Dr. Kelly writes some words under the two category headings. As you can measure this brain, you can determine how long and wide it is and how much it weighs. But you can't use a scale to weigh what I'm thinking right now, adds Daniel. Exactly, says the doctor, as she adds more words to the category. Brains are measurable, but minds are not. Also, says Dr. Kelly in a more serious note, this brain is available for everyone to see. When a person is alive, we can only see his or her brain if we perform a surgery. But even if we did that, we could never see his or her mind. That's why when someone says they're reading your mind, you know they must be joking, says Jeffries. You can only read things you can see publicly, and we can't see your mind or your thoughts because you hold them privately. That's right, says the doctor. We've just described three important reasons why we know our brains are not our minds. Dr. Kelly points to her list on the whiteboard. Philosophers and scientists think there are many other ways that the brain is different than the mind. But I think these three reasons are enough for us to get the point. She lifts the jar again. This jar contains a brain, but it doesn't contain any thoughts. There's a difference between brains and minds. So, if we're going to solve the mysteries of the shoebox and the universe, we're going to have to use our minds, says Detective Jeffries. Now let's thank Dr. Kelly and use our minds to figure out how to get back to the police department. May I ask a question? Asks Jason back in the briefing room. I'm not sure why it's important to know the difference between the brain and the mind. How does any of this help us solve our cases? Well, says Jeffries, your grandfather specifically asked you to think about the clues. And as it turns out, your ability to think is an important piece of evidence as we investigate the cause of the universe. Jeffries returns to the whiteboard. Many scientists believe everything in the universe is made up of only space, time, and matter, and that everything can be measured, seen, or held. If that's true, we have brains but not minds, because our minds and thoughts can't be examined in any of those ways. But I know I have a mind with thoughts, declares Daniel, because I'm thinking about what you just said. Jason laughs along with some of the other cadets. Good point, says Jeffries. Your common sense and even your common experience tells us that we do indeed have minds. But scientists who believe that everything in the universe must be explained with only what's available in the universe, only space, time, and matter, still aren't able to explain the existence of the immaterial mind. What if our minds came from something other than what's inside the universe, you ask? You mean like God? Asks Hannah. Before anyone can respond to her question, she adds, if God has thoughts and created us to be like him, we would also have minds and thoughts, right? Let's add this new piece of evidence to our diagram, says Jeffries as he starts to draw on the whiteboard. The existence of minds in the universe. This evidence allows us to add one more description to our suspect profile. Whatever caused the universe to come into existence appears to be a mind capable of creating other minds. I've never thought about these kinds of things before, says Daniel, but I've heard some of my friends say seeing is believing. They don't believe in God or angels because they can't see them, but they have thoughts and minds of their own that can't be seen or touched or measured in any way. Now, maybe you can help them think about their thoughts as an example of something you can believe without seeing, suggests Jeffries. There might be more to the universe than meets the eye. Jason is thinking about the note when he says, my grandpa said I should think about the clues, but he also said I would change my mind. What did he want me to change my mind about? We'll look at that issue next week, says Jeffries with a wry smile, if you don't mind. Some of the cadets groan and laugh as they leave the room. Chapter 6, A Change of Mind. Are real choices even possible? Nice pass, says Jason as Hannah kicks the ball across the yard. He passes the ball back while they play under the broad branches of the bloodgood tree. It's about an hour before the next academy session. Got room for one more? Asks a familiar voice from the next door. Jasmine pokes her head up over the fence. Sure, says Jason. Grandma Miri is away running errands, but Jason knows she wouldn't mind his friends visiting in the backyard. Jasmine climbs over the fence and turns out to be as good a soccer player as she is a fence jumper. Their soccer session is interrupted by a loud crying noise from the tree branches. They look up and discover Simba is sitting on the very branch where Jasmine found the nest. He's crying in a very strange way. I wonder if Simba is the reason why the bird's nest was empty, says Hannah with a smirk on her face. I hope not, replies Jason, although he is a good hunter. Why is he making that sound? Asks Jasmine. I've heard him do that before. Jason walks to the tree and stands just beyond the flower bed. He seems to have more difficulty coming down from the tree than he has going up. He's stuck up there, asks Hannah. Probably. Before Jason can say anything else, Jasmine starts climbing the tree. I'll get him, she says, and in less than a minute she's on her way back down, carrying Simba under her right arm like a stuffed animal. Be careful, says Hannah, recalling that Jasmine almost tripped when she came down the tree before. You stumbled here in the flower bed last time. She looks down and sees the edge of something sticking up out of the dirt. Jasmine is now standing at her side. Is that what you stumbled on last time? Hannah asks. Simba meows. I guess so, says Jasmine. Jason spreads the flowers a bit to get a better look. It's a metal box of some kind. He brushes away the dirt, but most of the box is buried and won't budge out of the dirt. The cadets look at each other. Are you thinking what I'm thinking? Says Jason to Hannah. She smiles knowingly. What? Asks Jasmine as she sets Simba down in the grass. Well, my grandpa drew a picture of me standing next to this tree. Why? Maybe he wanted me to come here to find something. And in his note, he said that you would have to dig around, adds Hannah. And he included a hand shovel, says Jason. We should dig this up right now, exclaims Jasmine. Everyone gets on their hands and knees and starts to dig. A strange look suddenly comes over Hannah's face. Stop, she yells. Why? Asks Jasmine. We can't just dig up Grandma Miri's flower bed. Hannah looks at Jason. I mean, not until we at least get her permission. I agree, I guess, admits Jason. But we already decided as a group, complains Jasmine. My cousin says it's sometimes better to ask for forgiveness afterwards than permission beforehand. Hannah laughs. Well, that's a funny way to put it, but this box looks like it has been buried here a long time. I guess it can stay a little longer until we ask Grandma Miri. But she's not home right now, reveals Jason as he stands back up, and it's almost time for the academy to start. They're disappointed and anxious to dig up their new discovery, but they reluctantly decide to leave the box and begin walking to the police department. Wow, says Detective Jeffries. That's a fantastic discovery. He pulls the original shoebox from the evidence bag and places it on the table in the briefing room, as Jason and Hannah finish telling everyone about the buried metal box. Why didn't you bring it with you? Asked Daniel. We originally planned to dig it up, explains Jason, but we changed our minds because we didn't want to mess up Grandma Miri's flower bed without asking first. Good call, says Jeffries. So why didn't you just ask her? She wasn't home, replies Jason with a disappointed look on his face. That's all right, says Jeffries. Good detectives are patient, responds everyone in unison. We'll dig up the box as soon as possible, assures Detective Jeffries. It definitely sounds like it's related to the shoebox mystery. It would explain the hand shovel and Grandpa N's statement about digging around. Jeffries pauses for a moment and looks at Jason. But Grandpa Wren also wrote that you would change your mind. I wonder how he would know that. Jason is thinking. I'm really not sure. Well, says Jeffries, you may have discovered important evidence in that yard, evidence that might help us solve the mystery of the shoebox and the mystery of the universe. The cadets look at one another. No one is quite sure what Jeffries is talking about. I understand why the evidence might be important to the shoebox case, but what evidence did they discover about the universe? Asked Daniel. Jeffries explains. Jason and Hannah made a decision to dig up the box, right? Yes, but we did change our minds, says Hannah. And there you go, another piece of evidence. Jeffries adds this to the universe evidence diagram. Humans are free agents. You mean like secret agents? Asked Daniel. Is that why this is called a Special Investigation Academy? Not exactly, says Jeffries. All of us in this room can change our minds, just like Jason, Hannah, and Jasmine did today. And that's an important piece of evidence that can help us identify the cause of the universe. Jeffries then abruptly leaves the briefing room. The cadets talk amongst themselves and wonder what the detective is up to. Moments later, he returns with a small flannel drawstring bag. I just came from the break room down the hall, he explains, as he opens the bag and spills the contents onto the table. Some of our employees like to play dominoes during their lunch breaks. An entire set of dominoes is now scattered across the surface of the table. Do you remember last week when we talked about the difference between brains and minds? He asked the group. If you recall, the biggest difference between your brain and your mind is simply the fact that your brain is a physical material object and your mind is not. That's why we can't use a tape measure to measure our thoughts, recalls Daniel. That's right, says Detective Jeffries, as he begins to stand up the dominoes in a line on the table. Each domino is separated from the next by less than an inch. He's careful not to knock any of them over so the entire line will remain upright. Like we said last week, if everything in the universe is entirely physical, that means if it's all just space, time, and matter, minds don't exist because they aren't physical. People who believe everything in the universe can be explained by staying in the universe don't believe in a non-physical mind. So where do they say our thoughts come from then, you ask? Jeffries responds, they say our thoughts are simply physical events that happen in our brains. He walks over to the light switch and turns the lights off, then on again. They believe that physical cells in our brain called neurons transfer electrical impulses from one cell to another, causing a reaction first in our brains and then in our bodies. So we're like computerized robots? Asked Daniel. Well, that's what some people believe, says Jeffries, walking back to the dominoes. But there's a problem if that's true. He stands next to the row of dominoes and extends his finger toward the first domino. If everything that happens in our brains is purely physical, the activity between your neurons is just like this row of dominoes. He pushes the first domino and all the others fall in sequence. Did you notice that once I pushed the first domino, all the others fell in order? All the cadets nod in agreement. Could any of these dominoes choose not to fall, he asks. No, says one of the cadets. Why not? Jeffries waits for an answer. Because they're just dominoes, says Jason. They can't think and make their own decisions. Exactly, continues Jeffries. Dominoes are just physical objects, so they respond without making choices. They fall because something fell against them first. He holds up his finger. But did you notice that I was able to make a choice freely to start the dominoes falling? I didn't do it because something fell against me first. I just decided to do it on my own. I'm more than a physical object. I can act as a free agent. If the universe is only space, time, and matter, he continues, everything in it is just a physical object of one kind or another, including your brain. And if that's the case, you can't make free choices any more than dominoes can make free choices. Every time you think you're deciding something on your own, you're really just responding to something physical in your brain that fell against you first. But that's not what happened to us today, protests Hannah. We were going to dig up the box, but we truly did change our mind. We stopped. We thought about it, talked it over, and made a real choice. We were in charge. It sounds like you have some first-hand evidence that the universe is more than just space, time, and matter. You have evidence that the universe can't be purely physical. Jeffries turns to the other cadets. Does everyone else agree? Can you all think of times when you changed your mind or made a decision on your own? My mum says I change my mind too often, says Daniel, especially when I'm trying to decide what flavour I want at the ice cream shop. Jeffries laughs. We all make free choices every day, but you can't get this kind of freedom unless you have something more than space, time, and matter to work with. God would have more to work with, wouldn't he? Asks Hannah. He's not limited by space, time, and matter, right? If he created us to be like him with minds, she says, recalling their session from last week, wouldn't this explain why we're able to think freely? Yes, says Jeffries. The fact that we are free agents inside the universe tells us something about whatever caused us outside the universe. The cause of the universe is a free agent capable of creating other free agents. Detective Jeffries picks up the original shoebox and hands it to Jason. The forensics lab finished photographing all these items, so I'm going to give them back to you. You might want to use that hand shovel to dig up the metal box, Jason excitedly agrees. Our suspect profile is almost complete, says Jeffries, and I think we're going to solve our mysteries very soon. Call your parents and tell them our session will be longer today. Let's go see what's inside that buried metal box. Chapter 7, Choosing Right from Wrong. Is morality more than an opinion? Jason is holding the shoebox tightly as he walks back home from the police department with Detective Jeffries and the other cadets. As they pass Jasmine's house, she runs up to Jason. Are we going to dig it up now? She asks, her eyes bright. I've been waiting for you guys to come home this entire time. Yes, says Jason. Detective Jeffries agrees. He thinks it might be part of the mystery. Jason runs into his house to talk with his grandma as Detective Jeffries hands out police flashlights to some of the cadets. Moments later, Jason returns. My grandma's on the phone right now, but she says she'll join us in a minute. Jason leads them through the backyard gate, and they gather under the bloodgood tree. The evening air is crisp, and the sky is beginning to grow dark. One of the cadets uses a flashlight to light up the flower bed. There it is, says Jasmine, as she begins to push back the flowers to expose the edge of the box. Don't hurt the flowers, reminds Hannah. We said we would wait for Grandma Mary's permission, remember? How much longer will she be? Asks Daniel. Oh, she shouldn't be too much longer, says Jason. He can see that some of the cadets are very eager to start digging, especially now that they can see the partially buried box. He pulls the hand shovel from the shoebox. Simba joins the group and makes his way over to the buried box. He puts a paw in the dirt, then pushes the object with his nose. Even Simba doesn't want to wait any longer, says Jasmine. Jeffries is standing back, watching everything closely. Do I need to say it? Good detectives are patient, shouts one of the cadets. It's more than that this time, says Jeffries. You've all recognized an important moral truth while waiting for Grandma Mary. It's not okay to destroy someone's property, in this case a flower bed, without his or her permission. I'm proud of all of you. You're choosing to do the right thing, even though many of you would rather just start without asking. Just then, Grandma Mary steps out onto the back porch and turns on the light. The yard gets a little brighter, but the cadets still need their flashlights to see the flower bed. Thanks for waiting for me, she says as she approaches the cadets. Now, what's all this fuss about my flower bed? Jason explains and Grandma Mary smiles, her signature smile. I'm so glad you waited to ask me about digging up my flowers. Jason knows how much I love my garden. She looks admiringly at the entire yard, then focuses on the area under the bloodgood tree. Just do your best not to destroy too many of these beauties as you dig up your mystery, she says, as she scoops up Simba. Jason and Daniel dig with the shovel and their hands. The other cadets lean over closely and do their best to light up the area with the flashlights. Only a few flowers need to be removed, and within moments they've dislodged a small, sturdy metal box. It's worn and rusty, with a handle on its hinged top and a locking latch. It sure looks old, you say. Jason brushes the dirt off the box and looks at Jeffries. Should I open it, he asks. Of course, urges Jeffries. Jason tries to open the latch, but it's frozen in place. He appears frustrated and starts to use his shovel to pry open the lid. Hold on, says Jeffries. It's either locked, frozen, shut by the rust, or both, interrupts Jason. Or both, agrees Jeffries. Let's bring it back to the lab. They have what we need to unfreeze this lock, and the technicians will be there for another hour. The cadets gather their things, say goodbye to Grandma Mary, then head for the gate. Can I come along too? Asks Jasmine. Sure, says Jeffries. Just ask your parents for permission as we pass your house. Back at the police station, Jeffries puts the dirty box on the clean white paper of the examination room table. I've asked one of our techs to bring some solvent and a lockpick set. While we're waiting, I want to ask you about your decision not to destroy Grandma Mary's flower bed without her permission. Why was that the right thing to do? Because Hannah said we should ask first, exclaims Jasmine. Is that what made it the right thing to do? Because Hannah said so, asks Jeffries, looking at Jasmine. You didn't agree with her at first, right? So why was her opinion about this more important than yours? Because she's older and bigger than me, says Jasmine, as she searches for a good answer. I think we've just discovered another piece of evidence in the universe, the existence of real moral truths that apply to everyone. Jeffries turns to the whiteboard and draws a picture of Hannah. Most people know right from wrong, even if they don't know where those truths come from. We know that it's wrong to destroy someone's property without permission, but how do we know that that's wrong? Are these kinds of moral truths just a matter of personal opinion, like Hannah's opinion about the flower bed? Maybe, says Daniel. Why was Hannah's opinion more important than Jasmine's? Asked Jeffries. Was it really only because she's older and bigger? No, says one of the cadets. If that were true, all the bullies in the world would get to say what's right or wrong. Good point, agrees Jeffries as he draws an X through his sketch of Hannah. So we know that moral truths can't just be a matter of personal opinion. Where else might moral truths come from? Well, says Daniel, as he looks at the rest of the cadets gathered in the examination room, laws come from countries, right? So maybe moral truths come from whatever group you're part of. Great observation, Daniel. Jeffries does his best to draw a group of cadets above his drawing of Hannah. But if groups get to decide what's right and wrong, what do we do when two groups disagree on a moral truth? Jeffries waits for an answer. We fight with each other, exclaims Daniel, and everyone laughs. Don't laugh, says Jeffries, turning serious for a moment. History is filled with examples of countries warring with one another over what they believe to be morally true. But if it's wrong for the biggest person, the bully, to decide what's right or wrong, says Jason, wouldn't it also be wrong for the biggest or strongest country to decide what's right or wrong? Everyone quietly thinks about this. Jeffries breaks the silence. Let me answer that with an imaginary scenario. If the strongest country in the world said it was okay to enslave people for the fun of it, would that make it morally right to enslave people? No, says Hannah. It's not right to have slaves no matter what country you live in. Okay, says Jeffries as he puts another large X through his drawing of the group. Moral truths aren't the opinions of people or the opinions of countries, so where do moral truths come from? Maybe something is morally true because everyone on the planet agrees, says one of the cadets. Jeffries now draws a sketch of Earth above his drawings of Hannah and the group. Okay, let's test that idea, he says, as he also draws a figure of a strange-looking creature on the whiteboard. He turns to the cadets and says, let's use our science fiction imaginations for a minute. Imagine we can travel in space and we discover intelligent aliens on another world. Then he points to the creature. Would it be okay to destroy their property without asking? Do you think they would think it's okay? No, says Daniel, they probably wouldn't like it, and they look like they could eat us. The cadets laugh as Jeffries puts an X through his drawing of Earth and the alien. Moral truth doesn't come from persons, it's bigger than that. And moral truth doesn't come from countries or even planets with different species. It's bigger than these things too, so where does it come from? What intelligent source of moral truth is bigger than people, countries, planets, or even the entire universe? Hannah looks around the room and waits for someone else to answer. I know, she says finally. God? Asks Jason before Hannah can finish. Well, she continues, he is bigger than all those groups. Maybe that's why we all agree that it's not okay to destroy things without asking, because we all live in a universe created by God. I think you're onto something, says Jeffries. He quickly sketches his diagram of the universe. We've discovered another important piece of evidence in the universe, the existence of moral truths that apply to everyone. He adds this to the diagram, but these truths don't come from inside the universe, from people, countries, or even entire planets. They come from something bigger than anything in the universe. Whatever caused the universe to come into existence from nothing, fine-tuned it for life and designed living organisms, this cause is also the source of all moral truth. Before Detective Jeffries can say more, a lab technician knocks on the door of the examination room. She hands Jeffries a jar of solvent and the lockpick set. The cadets gather around the table as Detective Jeffries puts on a pair of latex gloves and starts brushing the liquid solvent onto the area of the latch. The rust around the lock begins to foam and sizzle. Jeffries then opens the lockpick folder and exposes a number of wired tools, each bent slightly in a variety of thicknesses. Now I get to show you my spy skills, he says playfully. He places one long pick in the lock of the box, then another shorter one alongside it. Jeffries carefully turns the two picks until everyone hears a metal click. The lid of the box pops loose. The cadets are all wide-eyed in awe. Detective Jeffries hands the box to Jason, who opens it excitedly and reveals the contents. Inside the box is a single piece of paper. Jason takes it out, unfolds it, and reads it out loud. Jason, you're a great detective. I hope you enjoyed this search. Now go to my study and look in the second drawer to find your gift. Everyone waits for Jason to say something. He begins to grin slowly, then tells the other cadets, let's go solve this mystery. Chapter 8. Good news about bad things. Can God and evil coexist? While racing back home, Jason tells the cadets and Detective Jeffries about Grandpa Wren's study. I don't go in that room very often, he says. Grandma wants to keep it just the way Grandpa left it. She calls it her memory place. When they arrive, Jason gathers the cadets in the living room and shows his grandma the note they found in the metal box. He gently asks her for permission to enter Wren's study. She hesitates a moment. It's my happiest place and my saddest place. Your grandpa was 50 years old when the doctor told us about his cancer. As she speaks, Simba jumps into her lap as if to comfort her. For a year he fought bravely, she says. He was always in pain. When he was gone, I cried for days, but I was also grateful his suffering was over. Hannah gives Grandma Mary a hug. Jason adds, Mum and Dad had already died in a car accident. Without saying anything more, Grandma Mary leads them down the hallway to Wren's study, an immaculate room filled with books and pictures. It's precisely arranged like a monument to Wren's life. This desk was handed down to Wren by his father, says Grandma Mary. He cherished it. The desk is old but beautiful, with 3 drawers on the right side. Jason walks to the desk and opens the second drawer. It is empty except for a large leather-bound Bible. Jason picks it up, and as he does, a piece of paper falls out. He opens the paper, then slowly reads it on to the other cadets. Jason, this Bible was the Bible I used when I studied about God in seminary. I eventually earned a degree, and I even served in a church for several years. I hope you will find this Bible as valuable as I did. It is a source of all truth. Now use the magnifying glass and look carefully at the ring in the box. I also wanted you to have my seminary graduation ring to remind you that God is good even in difficult times. You are part of His family. I wish I could have lived long enough to have given it to you in person. I love you, Grandpa. He must have written that just before he died, says Grandma Mary, smiling through her tears. Jason takes out the magnifying glass and examines the ring with you, just as you did when you were in the forensic lab. I just see letters. CGS, you say. Grandma Mary smiles and nods her head. Golden Gate Seminary. Wait, says Jason, there's something on the inside of the band. He adjusts the magnifying glass and reads an inscription. John 3:16. I love you, Jason. Jason pauses for a moment. Grandma, he asks, why didn't you tell me that Grandpa Wren was a Christian, or that he went to school and served in a church? Why didn't we ever talk about God? Jason's grandmother sits quietly in the chair next to the desk, looking down at her hands as she holds a letter from Wren. When I lost so many of the people I loved, I turned away from God, Jason, she said. My faith was shattered. Wren always said that God is love, but I couldn't accept that anymore. I just stopped believing in God altogether. Jason is silent. Grandma Mary continues, but Wren never stopped believing, even though all his pain and the pain and suffering of others and his, he was incredibly courageous and calm about it. He was convinced that God existed and that God loved him. I wasn't so sure. She touches the ring softly, but I guess Wren wanted you to know about God, so you could make up your own mind. The group is silent on the way back to the police department. The quiet continues for a moment as everyone thinks about what just happened. Detective Jeffries updates his diagrams and lists on the whiteboard. We've learnt a lot today, haven't we? He says, breaking the silence. Everyone agrees and begins to relax enough to start talking. Jason stands up and walks toward the diagram of the universe. Earlier, you said that all the evidence in the universe points to God, he says, as he looks at the diagram. But bad things happen in the universe. The people I really cared about all died before I could ever really know them. How can you believe that God is real when things like this happen every day? Everyone stops talking. Jeffries walks over to Jason, guides him to a seat at the front table, and invites all the other cadets to circle around and sit at the table with them. Lots of people have questioned why an all-powerful, all-loving God would allow evil to occur in the universe, says Jeffries to all the cadets. He turns to Jason, and many people, like Grandma Mary, have a hard time believing in God when bad things happen to them. Jason nods in agreement. But if there's more to life than just what happens to us here in the universe, it might explain why God allows things to happen to us, even bad things. Jeffries asks Jason for Grandpa Wren's Bible and opens it to the Gospel of John. Let's read that passage your grandpa engraved on the inside of the ring, John 3:16. For God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that whoever believes in him shall not perish, but have eternal life. I want you to notice two things about this passage, says Jeffries. First, it says something important. God loves the world. He loves you, Jason, and your family. But then why did he allow the people in my family to die like they did? Asked Jason. I think part of the answer is in the last sentence here. Those who love God and believe in him have eternal life. What does that mean, to have eternal life? Asked Daniel. According to the Bible, answers Jeffries, we're not just physical objects that live for a short time in the universe. We are living souls, and we can live even after we die forever in heaven. Jason still has a doubtful expression. Are you saying my grandpa isn't really dead? Your grandpa Wren's life here on earth is over, but the Bible says that when Jesus comes, he will be resurrected again. In fact, the Bible says that you will see your grandpa again, because the real him, as Grandpa Wren, will be reunited with you then when Jesus returns. My cousin died when I was small, says Hannah, and I can't wait to see her again. But Jason still doesn't look convinced. But that doesn't explain why my grandpa had to die the way that he died. Grandma Mary said that he was in pain every day, suffering. It just seems wrong and cruel. Everyone looks at Detective Jeffries. Jason's question is a good one. You also wonder why God would allow Grandpa Wren to suffer. Jeffries takes a deep breath and says, that's a really tough question to answer. But did you hear what Grandma Mary said about the way that your grandpa responded to the cancer? What do you mean? Asked Jason. Your grandmother said that your Grandpa Wren was incredibly courageous and calm, says Jeffries. He sounds like an amazing man, and I bet everyone here admires his courage. All the cadets nod their heads and encourage Jason about how brave his grandpa was. Everyone agrees that courage is a good thing, continues Jeffries. We want to see more of it in our world, not less. We also want to see more compassion, forgiveness, and love, right? Sure, says Jason. But if God wanted to develop those good attributes in all of us, says Jeffries, he'd have to allow some bad things to happen. You can't be courageous unless you're responding to danger. You can't be compassionate unless it's in response to suffering. You can't be forgiving unless you've been wronged. You can't be charitable unless someone is poor and in need. Jason looks like he's still not sure what to think. Let me put it this way, tries Jeffries again. If God wanted those good things to exist, courage, compassion, forgiveness, and charity, and love, he'd have to allow these bad things, danger, suffering, evil doing, and poverty. And he might allow these bad things to happen during our short lives in the universe if he knows we are going to have a wonderful eternal life. Whatever happens to us here, adds Hannah, won't compare to how happy we will be when we're reunited with our family and God forever. That's right, says Jeffries. I don't know, says Jason. That's a lot to think about. Let me add one more thing to think about, says Jeffries as he stands up and approaches the whiteboard. You said you thought it was wrong that your grandpa had to die so painfully, and I agree with you. But when you said it was wrong, did you mean it was really wrong, or that it was your opinion that it was wrong? This sounds like the session when we talked about moral truth, remembers Daniel. Exactly, confirms Jeffries. Right and wrong, good and bad. Are these just opinions that people, countries, or planets have, or are they bigger than that? Well, I don't think it's just an opinion, says Jason. If it's not a matter of opinion, says Jeffries, if it's bigger than that, then it requires a standard of good that doesn't change like opinions do. God is a standard of good, says Hannah, and I learned in church that he doesn't change, even when our opinions about things do. Jeffries agrees and adds this as the final piece of evidence in his diagram of the universe. Detective Jeffries opens up the day's final discussion with a question. When we complain that something seems wrong or bad, we do it because we are comparing things to an unchanging standard of good. Where does that standard of good come from? God, says Jason. He seems to be surprised by his own response. Jeffries smiles. The presence of evil in the universe, he says as he points to the diagram, is actually evidence that God exists. Because without God, there would be no reasonable way to call anything evil. Without God as the standard, good and bad are just a matter of opinion. Jeffries turns to the cadets. We accomplished a lot today. Go home and I'll see you next week. I think we can close these 2 cases in time for you to graduate from the Special Investigations Academy. Postscript. Mysteries solved. Jason and his grandmother take flowers to Wren's grave. After Grandma Mary places them by the headstone, Jason sits on the ground and begins to speak out loud. Grandpa Wren, you've said a lot to me, even without being here. I know you can't hear me now, but I just want to say these things. Something especially for you. I'm reading your Bible with Grandma. We've been learning about Jesus from the Gospel of John. I'm starting to see things differently. I never thought God existed, but I've changed my mind just like you knew I would. I love you, Grandpa. As they turn to leave, Jason says, I've made a decision, a big one. Me too, says Grandma. At the final session of the Special Investigations Academy, Jeffries calls up each cadet to receive his or her graduation certificate. In this academy, says Jeffries, we learned many new detective skills. We solved the mystery of the shoebox, and we even examined the evidence in the universe. Jeffries smiles at the group of cadets. You all did a fantastic job, he says sincerely. Jeffries turns to the whiteboard one last time and sketches the shoebox and his diagram of the universe. First, he points to his drawing of the shoebox. We investigated the shoebox and concluded that the evidence inside the box was best explained by someone outside the box, Grandpa Wren. We did have some help from the notes that he left us, observes Daniel. That's true, says Jeffries, as he points to the diagram of the universe. We also investigated the universe and concluded that the evidence inside the cosmos was best explained by someone outside, God. We could have used the note that he left us, says Hannah, pointing to Grandpa Wren's Bible on the table next to Jason. Ha ha ha, laughs Detective Jeffries. Yes, I could I guess we could have done that. God does have a lot to say in the Bible about how he created and fine-tuned our universe, but I wanted you to investigate the universe like a crime scene without using the Bible first. I wanted you to understand why God says everyone should believe he exists, even if they don't have a Bible to go by. In a passage written to Christians in Rome, the Apostle Paul wrote in the Bible, "For since the creation of the world, his invisible attributes, his eternal power and divine nature have been clearly seen, being understood through what has been made, so that they are without excuse." Jeffries points to the final suspect file. Everyone should know that God exists just from the evidence we find in the universe. Based on our investigations, we know a lot about God, even without his book to us. Jeffries puts down his marker and looks at Jason. "But now that you have a Bible, Jason, you can learn even more." "About that," says Jason as everyone turns to leave. "In the first Academy course, we learned about Jesus and what the Bible says about him. I'll be honest, I almost became a Christian when we finished that." "What stopped you?" asked Hannah. "I guess a couple of things. I still sometimes think miracles are hard to believe, and there are a bunch of them in the Bible. But I was also mad, I guess. Mad that my parents and grandpa died, and I thought if there is a God, I'm mad at him." The cadets listen intently. Jason continues, "But this academy has helped me change my mind. If God can create everything in the universe from nothing, I know he could easily raise Jesus from the grave and do all the other miracles described in the Bible too. It's easier to walk on water than it is to create the entire universe," says Hannah about one of Jesus' most famous miracles. Jason laughs. "Yes, and I think our talk about evil helped me understand why God would allow my grandpa to die the way that he did. If everything hadn't happened the way it did, who knows if I would have taken the Bible seriously." "What do you mean by that, Jason?" asked Jeffries. "I've been talking with my grandma, and we think God might have used everything in our lives to do something good. My parents and my grandpa never stopped believing in Jesus, and my grandpa found a way to get my attention about the Bible. God took care of us all these years, even without Grandpa Wren, and we both have a lot to be thankful for." A broad smile slowly spreads on Detective Jeffries' face. "We've made a decision this week," says Jason. "Grandpa Wren said I needed to change my mind, and now I understand what he was talking about. Grandma and I have changed our minds about two things." Go on, encouraged Jeffries. "We've changed our minds about God. We now believe that he exists, and we know his name is Jesus." "That's one decision," says Jeffries. "What's the other?" "After reading what the Bible says," continues Jason, "we think we need to change our minds about us." "I don't get it," says Daniel. "What do you mean?" "I used to think that I was a basically good person," starts Jason. "But then I read about Jesus. The more that I read, the more I realize I am far from being perfect and like him. In fact, I'm not even all that good most of the time." Jason holds up his grandpa's Bible. "There's a word in here, sin. I'd heard it before, but now I understand it. God made us to be perfect, to have no flaws at all. But we aren't. We're rebellious. We want to do things our way instead of God's way. It's not just the things we do, it's even the things we think." Jason looks at Detective Jeffries. "You talked about it when we were examining the universe. God is the perfect standard of good. We are not. We are all imperfect. So it makes sense that if we want to live with him forever, we have to solve that problem." "No," says Jason. "I know I could never be perfect, but God has a solution. That's why I think my grandpa wanted me to read John 3:16. God sent himself in the form of a human, Jesus. He lived a perfect life, but was killed as though he committed all the sins in the world. If we believe in him and that he died on the cross to pay the price for our sins, God will accept us as perfect, even though we aren't. Jesus took our punishment, and we get his reward. It's all for free, too," adds Jeffries. "This week," says Jason, "my grandma and I are going to church. It will be my first time and her first time in many years. We want to tell everyone that we're Christians and believe, and we want to learn more about Jesus." Jason takes his grandpa's ring from his pocket and puts it on his finger. It dangles loosely, and someday I want to earn a ring just like this one. The detective places a hand on Jason's shoulder and says, "I believe you'll get that chance, Jason, and the opportunities of many other kinds. You're becoming a good detective and your investigative skills will help you along the way."